The reception hall of Taralia's High Council gleamed like a vision from a dream, arches of translucent stone curving toward a ceiling alive with soft golden light, floor mosaics rippling like frozen water beneath the shuffling feet of dignitaries. Lieutenant Commander Trevor Pratt, freshly minted human ambassador, was still adjusting to the place's strange rhythm when she appeared at his side. Nera Tal, slim, graceful, eyes like liquid opal, extended a gloved hand in greeting. Before he could respond with the practiced courtesy he'd rehearsed for weeks, she leaned in and closed her teeth gently around the fingers of his own diplomatic glove. The bite was so quick, so light, that for a half-second he didn't process it until a flare of heat ran through his fingers. Ouch! The word was out before he could stop it. Reflex. Startled glances slid toward him like knives through silk. Nera's expression shifted, those iridescent eyes widening, a flush deepening the blue undertones of her skin, before she turned sharply and strode away across the polished floor. Trevor stood there with his mouth half open, painfully aware of the sudden emptiness at his side. A deep voice intruded from behind. "I see you've met Liaison Officer Nera." He turned to find Counselor Drell watching him, tall and broad-shouldered, the ridges at his temples etched with the faint shimmer of age. "Met her? She bit me," Trevor said, holding up his hand as if there be proof. Then left without a word. Drell's lips tugged toward amusement. A light bite is a traditional gesture here, a courtship overture. I suspect our cultural briefing to your Commonwealth was incomplete. Trevor felt heat rise into his ears. "You're telling me that was a sign she found you appealing?" "Yes." "Your reaction, however, was interpreted as rejection." "Rejection. In public. Perfect. First day on the job," Trevor muttered. "Already insulting my liaison officer." "These misunderstandings happen," Drell said, though his tone carried the faint hum of political calculation. "I can assign another." "Liaison if you prefer." Trevor shook his head. "No. If I'm going to represent humanity properly, I need to fix this myself." "Where is she now?" "In the Eastern Gardens," Drell replied after a pause. "It's where many go to compose themselves." Trevor crossed the hall, the murmurs of council members fading as the corridors curved into open air. The Eastern Gardens unfolded in a riot of color blossoms and purples, so deep they seemed to drink the sunlight, fountains spilling into pools edged with amber stone. The scent was intoxicating, a blend of sweet pollen and something sharper, almost electric. He spotted her on a bench near the heart of the garden, her posture straight, hands resting loosely in her lap. The light caught strands of her midnight hair, turning them to ribbons of blue fire. She saw him immediately. Her shoulders stiffened, her gaze narrowing in wary reserve. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Officer Nera," he began, careful. With his tone, "I owe you an apology." Her eyes sharpened. "For what, Ambassador? Publicly humiliating me?" "For my ignorance," Trevor said simply. "On Earth, biting someone isn't a friendly greeting. I didn't understand what it meant to you." Her curiosity flickered through the coolness. "And what does it mean where you come from?" "Usually an attack," he admitted. "Or, in certain contexts, something extremely forward between established partners." Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "Then I suppose my subtlety failed?" "Subtle?" He couldn't help it. A laugh escaped him. "Compared to some of our courtship rituals, very," she said. The edge in her voice softened. "Though I should not have been so forward with an off-worlder. It was unprofessional." Trevor took a small step closer, keeping the measured distance she'd set. "Maybe we could start over. I'm Trevor Pratt, human ambassador, and I promise not to misinterpret your customs again." Her gaze held his for a long moment before her own smile came warmer, this time real. "Nera Tal, liaison officer. And I promise not to bite you." Again, without warning. Something in the air between them shifted subtle, but undeniable. As they stood in that sunlit garden, the scent of alien flowers thick around them, Trevor felt the tension ease into something else. When she gestured for him to walk with her, his fingers brushed hers just enough to feel the warmth of her skin. Neither pulled away. The path wound deeper into the garden, and the conversation turned to safe ground architecture, planetary history, the delicate balance of Terralian politics, but the tone had changed. They were no longer just a human diplomat and an alien liaison. In the faint, intentional pressure of that brief touch, something had begun, delicate as the bite of her teeth, warm as the golden light bathing the flowers. The grand banquet hall of Terralia was a cathedral of light. Glasswork arches curved overhead like the ribs of some ancient, benevolent leviathan, refracting the glow of 1,000 suspended orbs. The air smelled faintly of spiced pollen and roasted grains, and the air smelled faintly. Hum of conversation rippled beneath the high ceiling like the tide. Trevor Pratt smoothed the front of his Commonwealth dress uniform, acutely aware of every pair of eyes following him as he and Nera entered side by side. "There are a lot of people here," he murmured, keeping his smile fixed in place. "The council invited representatives from all 7 provinces," she replied, her voice pitched low for his ears alone. She wore a flowing garment of midnight blue that shimmered when she moved, each step catching the light differently. Against her skin, the fabric looked like poured shadow. "You're the first human many have ever seen, Ambassador. Your arrival is significant." "No pressure, then," he muttered, and her lips curved into the smile he was learning to anticipate, a small, knowing thing that could cut through his nerves in an instant. Their seats awaited them at the high table, Trevor positioned between Counselor Drell and Nera. The spread before them was a painter's palette of colors and textures. Fruits shaped like stars, dishes that seemed to steam with light rather than heat, bread so airy it looked spun from cloud. Servers moved with choreographed precision, placing each course before them in silent ceremony. Nera gestured toward a small, star-shaped fruit, the color of cobalt glass. "The blue fruit is particularly delicious," she said. Trevor picked it up, testing its weight. "How do I eat it? Just bite in?" Her hand shot out, a hint of alarm in her eyes. "No, you must peel away the outer layer first. Here, allow me." He froze as her fingers brushed his while she took the fruit from his hand. She worked the skin away with deft movements, revealing pale flesh beneath, its surface glistening faintly. The scent was intoxicating sweet, bright, with a tang that made his mouth water. When she placed it back into his palm, her gaze met his for an instant longer than necessary. "Now you may eat it," she said, and it almost sounded like a challenge. He bit into it, and flavor flooded his senses, sweetness that dissolved into citrus sharp tang, with an undercurrent like cinnamon and sun-warmed stone. "That's incredible," he said, but as the words left his mouth, a hush swept the nearby tables. Conversations faltered. Dozens of Terralian eyes turned toward him, some wide with surprise, others narrowed with a knowing amusement. "What?" he whispered to Nera. Her cheeks had deepened to a darker blue, a blush, he realized. When a Terralian female prepares food for a male, and he accepts it directly from her hands, it is considered an intimate act. Trevor's stomach dropped. "How intimate?" "In our culture, it is a public declaration of romantic intent," she replied, her eyes flicking away, as if the answer itself was too heavy to deliver head-on. He nearly choked on the fruit. "So I just announced to half your leadership that we're courting?" "Yes," she said softly. "Though as an off-worlder, most will assume you were unaware." "And you?" he asked, suddenly aware of how close they sat, his shoulder brushing hers. "They will assume I am." "Open to the possibility," she murmured, It was only then that he realized the truth. She had done this on purpose. Not out of malice, but with a deliberate curiosity, perhaps even a quiet hope. And strangely, he found he didn't mind. "Well," he said under his breath, "since we've already scandalized the room, you'd better tell me what other customs might get me in trouble." Her eyes snapped back to his, surprised at his lack of anger. Then, slowly, that smile curved her lips again. "You are not what I expected from a human diplomat." "Good," he said. "I'd hate to be predictable." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of foreign flavors and political speeches, but Trevor noticed little beyond the subtle presence of Nera beside him. The brush of her sleeve against his arm, the faint jasmine and starlight scent she carried, the quiet authority with which she explained a cultural nuance or a political undercurrent. Every small contact felt deliberate now, and when their fingers brushed while reaching for their glasses, neither of them moved away. By the time they left the hall, the city's twin moons were rising above the spires of the capital, and Trevor realized his mission had shifted in ways the Commonwealth could never have anticipated. Whatever this was with Nera, misunderstanding, provocation, or something more, he was already in too deep to turn back. The transport skimmed low over Kalatha's mountain ranges, its polished hull catching the morning light like a shard of silver. Trevor sat beside Nera in the passenger cabin, the windows opening to a view that felt like another world entirely towering. Peaks draped in emerald forests, waterfalls tumbling into mist-filled valleys, and settlements woven seamlessly into the land itself. Kalatha was nothing like the sleek, curved grandeur of the Turalian capital. Here, the architecture seemed grown as much as built, living plants braided into walls, roofs blooming with flowers. The province of Kalatha maintains traditions dating back to before our first spaceflight, Nera explained, her voice quieter than usual, as though the place itself commanded reverence. Some might call them archaic. "Define archaic," Trevor said, turning from the view to study her profile. Morning sunlight washed over her features, making the faint ridges at her temples catch with golden highlights. "They observe courtship rituals with particular strictness," she said, and there was a flicker, just a flicker of uncertainty, in her tone. "And they're especially traditional regarding interspecies interactions." He caught it instantly. "Should I be concerned?" "The provincial governor knows you're coming," she said, eyes still on the mountains. "But the general population may be less welcoming than in the capital." Trevor leaned back, considering that. He'd faced skeptical rooms before, but never with this kind of personal entanglement hanging in the air between him and his liaison. Not that he regretted it. Not at all. The transport descended toward a settlement perched on a high plateau, where terraced gardens spilled down the slopes in precise, verdant layers. A delegation awaited them on a landing platform of pale stone. At the center stood a tall man with markings etched down his face and arms, patterns Trevor instinctively knew were significant. "That's Governor Thane," Nera said under her breath. "When speaking, maintain eye contact, but don't stare at his markings. They're sacred." The greeting was formal, measured words, shallow bows, questions about Earth and its customs. Thane's curiosity seemed genuine, but Trevor couldn't miss the wary glances from others in the group. They were escorted to their quarters, a guest pavilion overlooking a breathtaking waterfall. Inside, the air was cool and fragrant with mountain herbs. The attendant showed them the single sleeping chamber, then withdrew. Trevor glanced from the broad, low-slung bed to Nera, whose expression was unreadable. "There seems to be a mistake," he began. "It's not a mistake," she said, before he could finish. "In Kalathan culture, unmarried travelers of opposite genders are housed together. To do otherwise would imply dishonor." "Dishonor?" "The assumption is that if two people are traveling together, they are already intimate partners." Suggesting otherwise would be an insult. Trevor rubbed the back of his neck. So, we're expected to share these quarters? Yes. Her cheeks deepened to that now familiar darker blue. I could request separate accommodations, but it would cause offense. I'll sleep on the floor, he offered, more out of instinct than intent. Nera's eyes widened in alarm. That would be a grave insult to me. It would suggest I am undesirable. That's definitely not the issue, he said, the words leaving his mouth before he thought better of them. Something passed between them, then unspoken, but charged. Nera stepped closer, her voice lower. When I arranged the fruit ritual at dinner, it wasn't just impulse. I've been drawn to you since we met. Trevor swallowed, feeling the air between them shift. I'm attracted to you too, he admitted, but I don't want our personal relationship to compromise the mission. Among my people, personal connections strengthen diplomatic ties, she said softly. True understanding comes from genuine bonds. They stood there for a long moment, the sound of the waterfall filling the silence. Then she reached up, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingers, a gesture so human it startled him. There will be challenges, she murmured. Navigating differences is literally my job, he said, and her soft laugh was almost lost under the rush of water. She leaned in, not biting this time, but pressing her teeth gently to his shoulder. Through his uniform. It was subtle, deliberate, and this time he understood it completely. Much later, moonlight spilled through the pavilion windows, casting silver across tangled sheets. Nera rested her head on his chest, her voice drowsy. The separate quarters option does exist, she confessed. It just requires an absurd amount of paperwork. Trevor laughed quietly, brushing a hand over her hair. Devious, he said. I'm starting to think humans and Talians have more in common than we realize. Perhaps that's why I wanted you close from the start, she replied, her words blurring into the edge of sleep. As he lay there listening to the steady rhythm of the waterfall beyond the walls, Trevor knew something fundamental had shifted. Whatever tomorrow's ceremony or politics brought, they would face it as something more than liaison and ambassador. The night had made certain of that. The morning broke crisp and pale, the mountain air sharp enough to sting Trevor's lungs. As he and Nera boarded the small transport assigned to return them to the capital, the rising suns gilded the peaks behind them, but the beauty of the view was dulled by the persistent buzz of the Commonwealth's emergency frequency in Trevor's wrist communicator. He'd been ignoring it since dawn, but now the urgency pulsed red against his skin. He accepted the transmission. Pratt here. The voice of Medical Officer Lang came through, tight with concern. Commander, we've detected an anomaly in your biometrics compound TR-290. It's native to Terralian physiology, but not known to be compatible with humans. Your levels have spiked since yesterday. We're concerned about potential neurological effects. We recommend immediate return to the Intrepid for testing. Trevor glanced at Nera. Understood, he said into the com. We'll be en route. When he ended the connection, her hand found his arm. For me? She asked quietly. They didn't say, but given our closeness, it's possible. Her gaze faltered, shadows moving behind her eyes. I would never knowingly harm you. I know. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. Let's get back to the ship and figure this out. They settled into their seats as the pilot, a broad-shouldered Terralian with a soldier's bearing, angled the transport down through the thin mountain clouds. Trevor stared out at the forested valleys passing below, but he couldn't ignore. The way his body felt different. Colors seemed sharper. He could hear the layered calls of birds from miles away. Every subtle motion of the ship registered in his muscles before he consciously recognized it. You seem more present, Nera observed, studying him. I feel different, he admitted. Stronger, faster, like everything's dialed up. Before she could respond, the transport lurched violently. Red lights bathed the cabin in a pulsing glow. A pilot's voice cut through the intercom. Atmospheric disturbance. Wait, no. We're being pursued. Unidentified vessel on approach vector. Trevor was already unbuckling his harness. Let me see. Ambassador remained seated. The pilot called back, but Trevor ignored him, striding to the cockpit with a speed that surprised even himself. Through the viewport, a sleek, dark craft with dagger-like wings cut through the upper atmosphere, its hull bristling with weapons. He recognized the design instantly. Verdari, he said grimly. The pilot shot him a sharp look. You know this species? Expansionists? They don't waste time on diplomacy unless it serves their interests. Trevor's mind was already racing. They're not here by chance. How fast would news of our binding ceremony spread? Instantly, through official channels. Nera answered from behind him. It would be considered significant diplomatic news. Another blast rocked the ship, rattling the control panels. The pilot swore. They're targeting our engines, not the cabin. They want us alive. They want prisoners, Trevor said. Which means they think your binding gives the Commonwealth territorial rights. Nera finished. Her eyes widened. The Meridian Belt. The one rich in resources you and they have both been contesting, Trevor said. If they stop us from reaching the capital, they can contest the legitimacy before our governments can act. The pilot's hands flew over the controls. I can't maintain altitude. We're going down valley ahead. The landing was rough but controlled, the ship grinding to a halt in a clearing surrounded by towering evergreens. The moment the engines powered down, Trevor snapped into motion. Kill all power, they'll be scanning for energy signatures. He turned to Nera. What's the cultural significance of our binding, in terms of law? It grants you status as a protected ally, which extends to your entire species within Terralian jurisdiction, she said quickly. It also allows your people to legally assist ours in disputes over contested territory like the Meridian Belt. Trevor's jaw tightened. And this isn't just about us. It's about shifting the balance of power. The pilot rose from his seat. There's an emergency beacon in the survival kit. If I can reach the ridge, I can signal for help. Go, Trevor said. We'll keep them busy. Nera stepped forward. I'm not letting you face them alone. You're the one they want, he countered. I've got whatever this enhancement is. Thanks to TR-290, I can handle myself. Through the viewport, 6 tall, angular figures emerged from the Verdari craft, exoskeletal armor glinting, movements precise and predatory. Trevor opened the emergency locker and pulled out a standard-issue stunner, checking the charge. Stay close, he told Nera. We make for the capital. Once we cross into Terralian jurisdiction, they won't risk open aggression. Her hand brushed his briefly intentional, steadying. Together, they stepped into the shadow of the valley trees as the Verdari spread out, the forest holding its breath. Trevor knew the mission he'd come here for: friendly relations. Trade groundwork was gone. This had become survival. And with Nera at his side, the stakes had never felt more personal. The Verdari holding cell was a hexagon of cold, sound-swallowing metal, its seamless walls reflecting only the faint blue-white glow of a recessed ceiling. Panel. Trevor sat on the floor, wrists bound in smooth, oddly comfortable cuffs that nonetheless resisted every subtle twist and pull. Across from him, Nera rested against the wall, her legs drawn in, eyes closed in the disciplined stillness of someone controlling her breathing. Their capture had been quick, but far from quiet. Trevor could still feel the echo of the fight in his muscles, the surge of speed and clarity that had allowed him to drop 2 Vedere before the neural disruptor found him. Through the haze of disorientation, he'd caught glimpses of Nera, moving with a precision and ferocity he hadn't seen before, taking down one assailant with a brutal sweep of her leg before another stunned her from behind. They'd been outnumbered, but the Verdari had been careful, almost gentle, in how they handled their prizes. "You're staring," Nera said suddenly, her eyes still closed. Trevor smiled faintly. "Just admiring your combat skills. You never mentioned you were trained for that." A small quirk of her lips. "All Terralian diplomatic liaisons receive basic defense training. I may have exceeded basic when I saw them hurt you." The cell door slid open with a soft hiss, and two Verdari stepped in. One was the expected armored guard, tall and angular, exoskeletal plates catching the light. The other was shorter, unarmored, and wearing a layered tunic that marked him as a civilian. His mandibles clicked softly before he spoke in fluent, precise Commonwealth standard. "I am Researcher Krell. I wish to speak with you without the interference of military protocols." Trevor and Nera exchanged a glance. "We're listening," Trevor said. Krell gestured, and the guard stepped forward to remove their restraints. Then, in a subtle display of either trust or arrogance, the guard left the cell entirely, the door sliding shut but remaining unlocked. "Our commander," Krell began, "believes your binding ceremony threatens Verdari interests in the Meridian Belt. He plans to use you as leverage in negotiations." "And you disagree?" Nera asked, rubbing her wrists. "I represent a faction within our society that questions isolationism," Krell said. "We see potential benefits in diplomatic relations with both humans and Tyrians. Your situation presents an unprecedented opportunity." Trevor narrowed his eyes. "Why tell us this?" "Because of you," Krell said, turning his gaze to Trevor. "The compound TR to 290 in your system should be incompatible with human biology. Our scans show otherwise. It is integrating into your physiology, enhancing cognitive and physical function." "You scanned me without consent?" Trevor asked sharply. "It is standard procedure for all detainees," Krell said dismissively. "But the results were unique. If Terralian biochemistry can benefit humans, perhaps there are other compatibilities between Verdari and other species. We could explore them together, provided we help you convince your commander not to start a war," Trevor said. "Precisely." Krell's mandibles clicked once more. Then he stepped back. "Consider my offer. You are free to move about. The detention level. The commander will decide your fate soon." When he left, the silence in the cell felt heavier. Nera slid closer to Trevor until their shoulders touched. "Can we trust him?" she asked softly. "Not completely," Trevor admitted. "But his interest in the compound feels genuine. If there's a faction pushing for diplomacy, this could be our way out." She leaned against him, just enough to be felt. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "When I bit your glove that first day, I never imagined it would lead to alien captivity and interstellar politics." Trevor chuckled quietly. "I've had worse first dates." She tilted her head toward him, eyebrow raised. "This qualifies as a date in human culture? Shared danger, exotic location, meaningful conversation, it checks a few boxes." The humor lingered between them, but something else was taking shape. Trevor could feel it literally. A faint hum of emotion at the edge of his thoughts. As if he were catching her mood before she spoke it. Warmth, tinged with guarded hope. He looked at her carefully. "I think the compound is still changing me. I can feel you somehow." Her eyes widened. "Among Tyrians, bound pairs develop empathic links over years. Days, in our case, is unheard of. Maybe the compound accelerated it," he said. "Or maybe humans and Tyrians are just more compatible than we've been told." Her smile was small but genuine. "Then let's use it. If we can feel each other, we can work as one when we face the commander. And if Krell's faction is real, we might convince them to choose science over war." Trevor reached for her hand. There, fingers locking together. And that's the plan. We didn't come this far to give up now. The low thrum of the Verdery vessel's engines vibrated through the floor, and somewhere beyond the cell, a proximity alarm began to pulse. Nera's hand tightened in his. Whatever was coming next, they would face it together, two linked minds. In a ship full of enemies. The proximity alarm quickened, each pulse a deep, metallic thud that seemed to vibrate up through the deck plates. Trevor and Nera rose together as the cell door hissed open, and Krell reappeared, mandibles clicking in an almost agitated rhythm. 2 ships have entered orbit around the moon, he said without preamble. 1 Commonwealth, 1 Terralian. They are demanding your immediate release. That was fast, Trevor remarked. The pilot must have reached the capital. The commander interprets this as confirmation of an armed alliance between your peoples, Krell continued. He is preparing defensive measures. Trevor glanced at Nera. Then take us to him. This doesn't have to end in a firefight. Krell hesitated, then nodded once and gestured for them to follow. The detention block opened into long, narrow corridors, lined with panels of dark composite that drank the light. Verdari crew moved. Quickly, their movements clipped and deliberate, the scent of heated metal and ozone hanging in the air. Trevor could feel Nera's presence like a warm current in the back of his mind, subtle impressions of her focus and alertness bleeding. Into his own thoughts, they stepped into the command center, a low, circular chamber alive with holographic projections. One display showed the 2 incoming ships holding position at the edge of the Verdery vessel's weapons range. At the center of the room stood Commander Vex, a towering figure in exoskeletal armor, carved with angular rank markings that caught. The light like frost. The prisoners should not be here, Vex said, his voice carrying the weight of someone unused to being contradicted. They may be the only chance to avoid unnecessary conflict, Krell countered. The human has a proposal. All eyes in the room turned toward Trevor. He stepped forward, drawing himself up without puffing himself up, calling on every lesson he'd ever learned in a tense negotiation. Commander Vex, I am Lieutenant. Commander Trevor Pratt of the Commonwealth. My mission here began as a diplomatic exchange with Terralia. The binding between myself and Liaison Officer Tall was not a military maneuver. It was a cultural misunderstanding that became something genuine. Your personal entanglements are irrelevant, Vex said flatly. The legal implications of your binding threaten Verdery claims to the Meridian Belt. They also present an unprecedented opportunity, Trevor said, keeping his tone calm and firm. The Terralian compound in my system TR-29 always not harming me. It's enhancing my abilities. That means there are forms of biological compatibility between our species no one imagined. What else might we discover if we work together? Communication officer turned from his console. Commander, both ships are hailing again. They insist on speaking with you directly. Put them through, Vex ordered. The central holoprojector flared, revealing 2 figures. Captain Harrington of the Intrepid, his uniform immaculate, even in tension, and Counselor Drell, the familiar ridges of his temples marked with formal silver powder. Both wore expressions of controlled concern. Commander Vex, Harrington said, you are holding Commonwealth and Terralian citizens against their will. We demand their immediate release. Your demands are noted, Vex replied, ice in every syllable. They will be released when assurances regarding the Meridian Belt are provided. Trevor stepped into the Hollis field. Captain Harrington, Counselor Drell, we're unharmed. We've been speaking with a Verdery faction that believes cooperation would benefit all 3 of our peoples. The TR-290 compound isn't a threat, it's proof of compatibility. Rather than fight over the Meridian Belt, we propose a joint research and resource-sharing arrangement. Drell's eyes narrowed, assessing him. An accord? An exchange, Trevor said. Shared scientific access to the Belt's resources, joint facilities, equitable division of findings. The potential benefits far outweigh the gains of war. Krell stepped up beside him. Our preliminary scans confirm the humans' claims. The compatibility is real. There is science here worth far more than territory. The command center rippled with low conversation in the Votary tongue. Vexes. Gaze shifted from Trevor to Nera, to Krell, and finally back to the projections of the two waiting ships. I will consider this proposal, he said at last, if both your governments agree to withdraw their vessels to a non-threatening distance while negotiations continue. After a brief exchange, both Harrington and Drell consented, the holofeed fading out a moment later. You are either very brave, Vex said to Trevor, or very foolish. I prefer optimistic, Trevor replied, unable to keep the edge of a smile from his lips. Humanity's strength isn't in firepower, it's in finding common ground, even with those we've been told are too different to understand. Nera stepped to his side, her hand finding his. The ancient laws that grant territorial rights through binding were written in an age before spaceflight. Perhaps this is the moment to reinterpret them for a new era, one defined by cooperation, rather than competition. For the first time, Vex's head inclined ever so slightly in acknowledgement. The hum of the command center shifted from the rhythm of battle preparation to the measured pace of negotiation. And as Trevor and Nera stood there, linked in body and mind, the outlines of something extraordinary began to take shape, not a fragile ceasefire, but the first draft of an accord that might change the course of 3 civilizations. 6 months later, the Pacific surf broke in slow, even swells along a pale stretch of beach, the horizon painted in molten gold and rose by the sinking sun. Trevor stood barefoot in the sand, trousers rolled, the salt wind teasing strands of hair loose from where Nera had tied it back for him earlier. Beside him, she let the foaming water swirl around her ankles, her blue skin catching the last. Warm light as if it were woven into her dot, it felt impossibly far from the cold metal of the Verdari command center, from the sharp scent of ozone and the hum of tension that had been their constant companion. The Intrepid lay anchored far offshore, its presence almost ceremonial now. Today was theirs. They're calling it the Terralian Human Verdari Accord, Trevor said, watching a gull wheel overhead. Sounds so formal for something that started with me making a fool of myself in a council hall. Her laugh was low and warm. You mean when you said ouch, as though I'd tried to kill you? Exactly, he said, glancing sideways at her. Who knew my lack of cultural awareness would lead to an accidental marriage and the biggest diplomatic breakthrough in decades? She tilted her head toward him, eyes bright in the fading light. Perhaps the progenitors did. The thought was still strange. The first time the scientific teams had brought him the readings from the Meridian Belt, he'd thought it was a joke, ancient structures buried deep within an asteroid cluster, dormant for untold millennia. But the moment the accord had been ratified and their binding officially logged in all 3 civilizations' registries, a signal had pulsed from that site, riding on subspace bands older than any known language. They built it for us. Nera said softly now, as though reading the thought from his mind, and maybe she was. Their empathic link was no longer a flicker of impressions. It was a steady, quiet current, not intrusive but always there. For 3 species, Trevor agreed. 1 Terralian, 1 Verdari, 1 human. He let out a slow breath. They were waiting for a moment like this. For us. The research so far had only deepened the mystery. TR-290 had triggered a dormant human protein family that matched sequences in both Terralian and Verdari biology, something no one could explain. It wasn't just chemical compatibility. It was as if they'd been engineered to fit together, to find each other. The beacon's translation had been short, almost taunting in its brevity. The Triad at last returns. Protocol Concord may proceed. Trevor stepped closer to her, brushing his fingers over the ridges at her temples. So, Mrs. Pratal, do we answer the invitation? Her lips curved. If we don't, every scientist from here to the Meridian Belt will chase us down and drag us. They're themselves. He grinned, then bent his forehead to hers. The ocean hissed and sighed at their feet, the air between them electric with the quiet knowledge that they had crossed a line few beings ever had, not just between worlds, but between destinies. Whatever's waiting for us out there, he said, we face it together. Nera's answering smile was fierce and certain. Together, she echoed, and through their link, he felt the steady thrum of her conviction, twined perfectly with his own. Far above the water, in the deepening twilight, a faint glimmer flared in the sky, distant, deliberate. The beacon calling them home.